The first time I lied to a bank, I convinced myself I was protecting my marriage. That sounds worse than it is, or maybe that's exactly what everyone tells themselves before everything falls apart. My wife, Emma, and I had been together long enough to believe we understood each other without speaking. We had a small house, a teenage daughter, predictable routines, and just enough money to argue about bills without ever missing one. Life wasn't exciting, but it felt solid. I honestly thought boring meant safe. I managed a family-owned construction supply business. One of our biggest clients was struggling to secure financing for a commercial property. The owner, Daniel, approached me with what he called a harmless favor. "I just need a purchase agreement on paper," he said. "The bank needs to see a signed contract before they'll release the loan. Nothing changes. Nobody loses anything. A fake sale. A fictional deal. Just paperwork." I laughed at first, assuming he was joking. He wasn't. I should have walked away right then. Instead, I asked questions that only mattered if I was already considering saying yes. Daniel had an answer for every concern. He'd done this before. Lawyers knew. Accountants understood. The paperwork would disappear once financing was approved. "It helps everyone," he kept saying. When I finally mentioned it to Emma, she frowned for a second before shrugging. "If it's legal enough for lawyers to touch it, why are you worrying so much?" That sentence echoed in my head for weeks. Looking back now, I don't think the fake contract ruined my life. I think agreeing to it taught me how easily people can convince themselves that a lie only exists on paper. The paperwork was finished in less than an hour. That should have been another warning. Something that supposedly involved hundreds of thousands of dollars was reduced to signatures, coffee stains, and polite smiles. Daniel shook my hand like I'd saved his company. "For insurance," he said, "let's keep this between us until the financing closes." I nodded without thinking. At home, Emma barely asked about it. She trusted me, and I mistook that trust for permission. Looking back, I realize I had started hiding things the moment I agreed to the fictional sale. Not because she demanded answers, but because I didn't want to explain the uncomfortable details. A few weeks passed. Life looked completely normal. Then Daniel began calling at odd hours. Sometimes he wanted another document. Sometimes he needed me to confirm a conversation if someone asked. Each request sounded tiny by itself, yet together they felt like wet cement around my ankles. One evening my daughter asked why I kept checking my phone during dinner. I laughed it off. Inside, though, I had the strange feeling that I had signed much more than a piece of paper, and I couldn't explain why. About a month later, the calls stopped as suddenly as they had started. I should have felt relieved. Instead, the silence made me nervous. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected another favor or another document that needed my signature. Nothing came. Daniel even acted unusually cheerful when we crossed paths at work, thanking me again for helping everyone. I wanted to believe it was over. Then Emma began acting differently. It wasn't dramatic. She wasn't secretive or cold. She just seemed distracted, as if her mind was somewhere else whenever we talked. I'd ask about her day, and she'd answer with a smile that disappeared a second too quickly. "Everything okay?" I asked one night. "Just tired," she replied, avoiding my eyes. Normally I would have accepted that without another thought. But after spending weeks hiding my own secrets, I found myself looking for them in everyone else. That's the cruel part about crossing your own moral line. You stop believing anyone is completely honest. I didn't know it yet, but my suspicion was about to land on the one person I trusted more than anyone. The first Betrayal crack appeared because of a notification. Emma had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to fold laundry. I wasn't trying to snoop. I was making coffee when the screen lit up. "Thanks again. We couldn't have done it without you." No name. Just a number. A second message arrived before the screen went dark. "Don't worry. He still doesn't suspect anything." My stomach tightened. I stood there staring at the phone, arguing with myself. Maybe it wasn't about me. Maybe it was work. Maybe I was letting my own guilty conscience invent problems that didn't exist. When Emma came back downstairs, she smiled as if nothing had happened. "Everything okay?" she asked. I almost told her about the messages. Instead, I heard myself say, "Yeah. Just tired." The lie came out effortlessly. That night I barely slept. Every possible explanation played through my head, and each one seemed worse than the last. For weeks I'd been terrified someone would uncover my secret. Now, for the first time, I wondered whether Emma had been hiding one of her own all along. I told myself I wasn't going to check her phone. I repeated it so many times that it almost sounded convincing. 3 days later, Emma fell asleep on the couch while we were watching a movie. Her phone slipped between the cushions, and the screen lit up again with another message from the same number. My heart was pounding before I even picked it up. There wasn't anything romantic. No hearts. No obvious flirting. What unsettled me were the conversations about meetings, paperwork, and making sure everything matched the original agreement. Then I found one sentence that made my hands go cold. "If your husband ever asks, we signed it together that afternoon." I read it over and over. Signed what? Together where? Emma had never mentioned meeting Daniel without me. I quietly put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, but I couldn't calm down. Every innocent memory suddenly felt suspicious. Every late errand, every unexplained delay, every distracted smile seemed to fit into a story I hadn't realized was being written. For the first time, I wondered if the fake business deal had connected our lives in ways I never imagined. The next morning, I couldn't pretend everything was normal. Emma poured coffee, asked if I wanted toast, and talked about our daughter's upcoming school trip. I answered with one-word replies, hoping she'd notice something was wrong. She did. "You're scaring me," she said. "What's going on?" I looked at her for a long moment before asking the question that had been burning inside me. "Why were you meeting Daniel without telling me?" The color drained from her face. For a few seconds, she didn't speak. She just gripped the edge of the kitchen counter so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Who told you that?" "No one," I said. "I saw the messages." She closed her eyes and whispered, "I knew this would happen." That wasn't a denial. My chest felt hollow. "What exactly is going on?" I demanded. Emma started crying before she answered. "It isn't what you think." I almost laughed. "Everyone says that." Then she admitted she had met Daniel several times to sign documents connected to the fictional sale because he claimed it would make the paperwork look more convincing. She insisted it had never been about an affair. But by then, I no longer knew what I was supposed to believe. I wanted to believe her. God, I really did. Emma kept saying the meetings were only about paperwork. Daniel had told her that having both spouses sign a few additional documents would make everything look more legitimate if the bank requested further verification. She admitted she should have told me, but insisted she thought she was helping me. "So you trusted him more than your own husband?" I asked. "I trusted that he knew what he was doing," she whispered. Those words hit harder than I expected. I called Daniel that afternoon and told him we needed to talk face to face. He didn't sound nervous. He sounded prepared. When we met, he barely let me finish my first question. "I didn't want Emma involved," he said. "She volunteered after you mentioned how stressed you were." That didn't match what Emma had told me. One of them was lying. Or maybe both were. As I drove home, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. The man on the other end introduced himself as an investigator working for the bank. He politely asked if I had a few minutes to discuss the property sale. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. The fictional deal was no longer just between us. I pulled into an empty parking lot before calling the investigator back. He spoke calmly, almost casually, which somehow made everything worse. "We've noticed a few inconsistencies in the transaction," he said. "We're simply verifying the timeline." Simple questions. When was the agreement signed? Who was present? Had the buyers inspected the property? Every answer felt like stepping onto thinner ice. I repeated the version Daniel had coached me to use, but halfway through I realized I couldn't even remember which details were real anymore. The lies had become tangled together. The investigator thanked me and ended the call without accusing me of anything. That silence terrified me more than threats would have. When I got home, Emma was waiting by the front door. "They called me too," she said quietly. For the first time in days, we weren't arguing. We were just scared. Then she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I need to tell you something else before someone else does." My stomach dropped. Whatever she had been hiding all this time, she had finally decided she couldn't keep it buried any longer. Emma asked me to sit down before she spoke. I stayed standing. She wrapped both hands around a mug of tea, even though she never took a sip. Her fingers were trembling so badly I thought she might drop it. "Daniel didn't ask me to sign those papers the first time," she said. I went to him. I stared at her, trying to understand. "What does that even mean?" She took a deep breath. "A few months before he came to you with the fake sale, I borrowed money from him." I felt the room spin. She explained that my father had quietly loaned money to my younger brother years earlier. When he died, the debt disappeared on paper, but my brother started asking Emma for help, promising it was temporary. She didn't want me caught between my family and my marriage, so she secretly covered part of what he owed by borrowing from Daniel. "I thought I could repay him before you ever found out." Instead, Daniel used that debt to pressure her into signing every document he wanted. Suddenly, the fake business deal wasn't the only secret destroying our family. I didn't know which betrayal hurt more. The fact that Emma had hidden a debt from me, or that my own brother had dragged her into it. I drove straight to his apartment. He opened the door, smiled, and then immediately stopped when he saw my face. "What happened?" "You tell me." At first, he denied everything. He claimed Emma was confused, that she'd offered to help because she felt sorry for him after Dad died. Then I mentioned Daniel's name. His shoulders dropped. He stepped aside and quietly said, "Come in." For the next hour, pieces of the truth spilled out. My brother admitted he had invested in a failing business and lost far more than anyone knew. Daniel had lent him money at first, but when the payments stopped, the debt became leverage. Emma stepped in because she was terrified that if I discovered the truth, I'd cut my brother out of my life forever. She was trying to protect this family, he muttered. I looked him straight in the eyes. "No," I said. "She was protecting your lies." For the first time, he had nothing left to say. When I got home, Emma was sitting exactly where I'd left her. She looked exhausted, like someone who had spent months carrying a weight that had finally become too heavy to hold. "I talked to him," I said. She didn't ask what he'd told me. She already knew. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I kept thinking I could fix everything before you found out." I sat across from her, leaving the entire dining table between us. It felt symbolic. We were in the same room, but we had never been farther apart. "What else haven't you told me?" She shook her head. "Nothing. That's everything." I wanted to believe those words. I even searched her face for the woman I trusted for years. But trust isn't something you switch back on. Once doubt settles in, every pause sounds rehearsed, every explanation feels incomplete. That night we slept in separate rooms for the first time since we'd been married. The silence in the house was unbearable. Our daughter noticed it the next morning. She looked from me to Emma and quietly asked, "Are you two getting divorced?" Neither of us could answer her, writing. We tried to pretend things were normal for our daughter's sake, but kids notice what adults think they hide. Dinner became quiet. Weekends felt forced. Even the smallest conversations sounded rehearsed, like two co-workers sharing a house instead of a married couple. A week later, we finally told our daughter that we were having some problems. She didn't cry. She just nodded, as if she'd already figured it out long before we admitted it. "I knew," she said softly. "You stopped laughing together." That sentence stayed with me. Meanwhile, the bank's investigation continued. We weren't charged with anything, but we were interviewed more than once. Every meeting reopened the same wounds. I had to repeat how the fictional sale happened, while Emma explained why she'd signed documents she barely understood. Each interview made me question not only our decisions but our marriage. The hardest part wasn't fearing legal consequences. It was realizing how easily two people can become strangers while believing they're protecting each other. By then, I honestly didn't know whether our relationship could survive even if the investigation eventually ended. A few months later, the investigation finally came to an end. Daniel was charged with bank fraud after investigators uncovered several other fictional property transactions that looked almost identical to ours. We weren't treated as masterminds, but we also weren't seen as completely innocent. The investigators made it painfully clear that signing documents without questioning them had real consequences, even if we hadn't profited from the scheme. Walking out of the final meeting should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt empty. The legal pressure disappeared, but nothing inside our house changed. Emma and I started counseling because neither of us was ready to file for divorce, yet neither of us knew how to rebuild what we'd broken. Every session uncovered another layer of resentment, guilt, and disappointment. I admitted that I'd hidden the truth first. She admitted that she'd chosen secrecy over trust. Neither confession erased the damage. For the first time, we stopped arguing about who had started it. We began grieving the marriage we thought we'd had, realizing it had been far more fragile than either of us ever wanted to believe. It's been 3 years now, and people assume we're one of those couples who worked through a rough patch. I usually just smile and let them believe it. The truth is harder to explain. Emma and I still live in the same house, but our marriage never returned to what it was. We learned how to be respectful. We learned how to communicate. We even learned how to laugh again sometimes. But trust came back in pieces, and some of those pieces are still missing. My brother moved to another state after everything happened. We speak on birthdays and holidays, but that's about it. I don't hate him anymore. I just don't know him the way I thought I did. Every now and then, I find the old folder that held copies of the fictional sale agreement. I should throw it away, yet I never do. It's a reminder that the most dangerous lies aren't always the biggest ones. Sometimes they're the temporary secrets, the favors that seem harmless, and the promises that everything will stay on paper. Those are the lies that quietly follow you home. I still think about the moment Daniel slid that contract across the table. If I'd stood up and walked away, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe Emma would have told me about my brother's debt before it grew into something neither of us could control. Maybe our daughter would never have learned how fragile adults really are. Or maybe another secret would have found us anyway. I've stopped trying to rewrite the past in my head because every version ends with the same lesson. Relationships rarely collapse because of one catastrophic event. They erode through small compromises, quiet omissions, and conversations that never happen because someone believes they're protecting the people they love. I used to think betrayal always looked dramatic and affair, a shocking confession, a single unforgettable moment. Now I know it can arrive disguised as a favor, a signature, or a lie that exists only on paper. If you're hiding something because you think the truth will hurt your family, ask yourself one question. Will the secret hurt them even more when it finally stops being secret? I wish I'd asked myself that before I ever picked up the pen.